One empty seat at a graduation ceremony revealed exactly where I stood in the family I had spent nearly 2 decades building. The truth didn't begin on graduation day. It started with a phone conversation I was never meant to hear and ended with a silence that echoed louder than any argument. That morning, my bedroom was unusually still. The rhythmic ticking of the old hallway clock blended with the sound of my heartbeat as I stood before the mirror, fastening a navy blue silk tie. It was the tie I reserved for life's biggest milestones, and today was supposed to be the proudest of them all. Ava was graduating from Howard University. For 17 years I had imagined this day countless times. I pictured myself applauding from the front row as the little girl I had raised walked proudly across the stage to receive her degree. Every overtime shift, every missed vacation, every sacrifice had led to this moment. Yet the man staring back from the mirror wasn't smiling. He looked exhausted, not physically. Emotionally, he looked like someone finishing the final page of a story that had quietly ended long before he realized it. Downstairs, Evelyn adjusted the sleeves of her elegant dress while checking her reflection in the hallway mirror. She looked flawless, but when she glanced at me, there was no warmth in her eyes, only careful calculation. "Nathan," she said casually, "the front row has limited seating." I nodded, waiting for the rest. I saved the last seat beside me for Trevor. Her words settled heavily between us. "You can sit in the overflow section. Ava will still know you're there." Trevor, the man whose title of father existed only on paper, the man who appeared every few months carrying expensive gifts he never paid for and promises he never intended to keep, the man who had somehow earned the place I had spent 17 years deserving. I simply looked at her. She mistook my silence for acceptance. Neither she nor Ava had ever understood something important. Quiet people aren't always weak. Sometimes they're simply waiting until they know exactly which door they're about to close forever. Outside, the morning air felt unusually cool. I placed a bouquet of crimson roses on the passenger seat before climbing into my car. As I started the engine, only one thought crossed my mind. Whatever happened today, I wouldn't be returning to this house as the same man. 17 years earlier, my life had changed on an ordinary rainy afternoon. Ava was only 7 years old when Evelyn introduced us. She stood behind her mother's leg, clutching a stuffed rabbit and watching me with cautious eyes. To her, I was just another adult who would eventually disappear. She had good reason to think that. Trevor had made disappearing into an art form. He would arrive unexpectedly with oversized teddy bears, expensive sneakers, and dazzling promises. For a few hours, Ava believed she had the world's greatest father. Then he vanished again, sometimes for months, sometimes longer. When he disappeared, he left behind unpaid bills, overdue rent notices, and a frightened woman trying to convince a little girl that everything would somehow be all right. I made myself a promise that day. If I stayed, I would stay completely. I wasn't interested in being the fun parent. I wanted to be the dependable one. Real fatherhood isn't measured by biology. It's measured by consistency. When Ava needed braces at 8 years old, Evelyn quietly folded the treatment estimate and placed it inside a kitchen drawer. She thought I hadn't noticed. The following week, I accepted a night shift unloading delivery trucks. For 6 months, I worked 2 jobs. Most nights, I slept less than 4 hours. By the time the braces came off, Ava smiled without covering her mouth. She never knew what those smiles had cost. When she turned 12, she discovered competitive dance. The tuition was overwhelming. The costumes cost even more. So I sold the motorcycle I had spent years restoring. Watching someone else ride it away felt like losing part of my youth. But seeing Ava perform beneath bright stage lights made every dollar worthwhile. Trevor attended that recital too. He arrived carrying a dozen red roses. After the performance, he hugged Ava, posed for photographs, and proudly posted them online with a caption celebrating his amazing daughter. Thousands of people admired the pictures. None of them saw the tuition receipt folded quietly inside my jacket pocket. That was the difference between us. He collected applause. I paid the price that made the applause possible. For the next several years, my life settled into a routine built entirely around one goal: making sure Ava never felt the absence Trevor had left behind. I attended every parent-teacher conference, every school concert, every soccer match, and every dance recital. Whenever she came home sick with a fever, I stayed awake through the night beside her bed, replacing cold towels and checking her temperature every hour. When she reached driving age, I spent weekends teaching her how to parallel park, reminding her to stay calm behind the wheel and always buckle her seatbelt. I wasn't trying to replace her biological father. I simply became the father who was present. Whenever Ava's debit card was declined while she was out with friends, my phone would buzz with a banking notification. Before she even realized what had happened, I quietly transferred money into her account. She never had to make an embarrassing phone call asking for help. She believed everything somehow worked itself out. I made sure it did. Over time, the little sacrifices became invisible. Like electricity behind the walls of a house, my efforts powered everyone's lives, without anyone thinking about where the energy came from. A few years after our marriage, I used the inheritance my parents had left me, along with nearly every dollar I had saved, to purchase a comfortable home. Evelyn insisted her name should also appear on the paperwork because it would make her feel secure. I agreed without hesitation. Back then, I believed trust was something you gave freely to the people you loved. Looking back, I confused dependence with appreciation. There's a difference. Dependence disappears the moment another source appears. Appreciation remains, even when circumstances change. Trevor continued drifting in and out of our lives like a traveler who never unpacked his bags. Every visit followed the same pattern. He arrived in an expensive-looking car that usually belonged to someone else. He spoke confidently about business ventures that were always about to succeed. He promised Ava lavish birthday gifts, family vacations, and a brighter future. Then he disappeared before any promise required real effort. Strangely, Evelyn admired him. She listened to his stories with fascination, laughing at jokes she had heard a dozen times before. His confidence dazzled her, even though it produced nothing tangible. Meanwhile, I fixed leaking faucets, replaced broken appliances, painted fences, balanced household budgets, and quietly paid every bill before the due date. Reliability rarely receives applause. It simply becomes expected. When Ava received her acceptance letter from Howard University, our living room erupted with celebration. She cried. Evelyn cried. Even I struggled to hold back tears. Years of determination had finally paid off. Then reality arrived. The tuition costs were staggering. Trevor immediately announced that he would pay half. "I've got a major investment closing next month," he declared confidently. "Leave it to me." I had heard those words before. Exactly 6 weeks later, the investment had mysteriously collapsed. His phone became difficult to reach. Eventually, he stopped answering altogether. Without telling anyone, I withdrew a large portion of my retirement savings. The decision frightened me, but I convinced myself it was worth it. This was the final stretch. Once Ava graduated, she would build a successful career and stand on her own feet. Everything would be all right. At least, that's what I kept telling myself. Over the next 4 years, I postponed vacations, delayed replacing my aging car, and accepted additional consulting projects during evenings and weekends. Every extra dollar found its way toward Ava's education. She graduated without overwhelming debt. That achievement became my greatest source of pride. What I failed to notice was that every sacrifice made the people around me increasingly comfortable accepting them. Kindness, when offered endlessly without boundaries, slowly transforms into expectation. Nobody thanks the sunrise each morning because they assume it will always appear. I had become that sunrise, constant, reliable, invisible. Then 1 week before graduation, everything changed. I had returned home earlier than usual after a client canceled an afternoon meeting. As I walked toward my study, I heard voices drifting from the partially open patio door. Evelyn was speaking softly on the phone. I recognized Trevor's voice immediately. "I know," Evelyn said with a quiet laugh. "Just be patient for 1 more week," Trevor chuckled. "And Nathan, he'll manage," she replied. "After graduation, we'll finally be able to move forward without him constantly hovering around. Ava deserves to have a complete family now." Complete family. The word struck harder than any physical blow. 17 years, every overtime shift, every mortgage payment, every hospital visit, every tuition check, reduced to one sentence. I remained frozen in the hallway until the call ended. Neither of them knew I had heard a single word. That evening, I smiled through dinner. I asked Ava about graduation plans. I wished her good luck then, after everyone had gone to bed. I quietly searched online for the phone number of a law office specializing in estate and property matters. The appointment was scheduled for the following morning. By the time graduation day arrived, I already knew something my family didn't. Sometimes the end of a story begins long before anyone notices the final chapter has been written. Graduation morning arrived bright and warm, with clear skies stretching over Howard University's historic campus. Families filled the walkways carrying flowers, balloons, and cameras, their laughter mixing with the music drifting across the grounds. I stepped out of my car holding a bouquet of deep crimson roses. I had chosen them myself the previous evening. They were beautiful, but as I tightened my grip around the stems, a sharp thorn pierced my palm. A thin line of blood appeared against my skin. Oddly enough, I barely noticed. Compared to what I was feeling inside, the pain was insignificant. I spotted Evelyn standing near the auditorium entrance. She wore the designer dress I had bought for the ceremony only a week earlier. She smiled at arriving guests, greeting relatives and friends with effortless charm. When she saw me, her smile faded into something carefully rehearsed. "Nathan," she said quietly, glancing around to make sure no one else was listening. "I need to tell you something." I waited. There was a change with the seating. I already knew where the conversation was headed. The university only gave us a limited number of front row seats. She paused, avoiding my eyes. "I promised the last one to Trevor." The words landed exactly as I expected, yet hearing them aloud still felt unreal. She quickly continued, as though explaining something perfectly reasonable. "You understand, don't you? He's Ava's biological father. Today is important for appearances. She deserves to see both of her parents together." "And me?" I asked calmly. "You'll still be inside," she replied. "The overflow section has plenty of space. Ava will know you're there. Know I'm there, not beside her, not with her, just somewhere in the crowd." I looked toward the auditorium doors. Rows of proud parents were already finding their seats, excited to witness years of hard work finally rewarded. For 17 years, I had imagined sitting among them. Instead, I had been quietly reassigned to the background. A familiar voice interrupted my thoughts. "There they are." Trevor strode across the courtyard, wearing an expensive leather jacket and sunglasses, despite the shade from the surrounding trees. He carried himself with the confidence of a man arriving to collect recognition he had never earned. Evelyn greeted him with a warm embrace. Moments later, Ava appeared. She looked stunning in her graduation gown, her cap perfectly straight despite the breeze. The instant she saw Trevor, her face lit up. "Dad!" she shouted happily. She ran directly into his arms. He laughed, lifted her slightly off the ground, and kissed the top of her head. I stood only a few steps away. Neither of them looked in my direction. Trevor pulled out his phone. "Come on," he said. "Graduation selfie." Evelyn slipped beside him. Ava stood between them, smiling brightly. The three of them leaned together, laughing as the camera captured what looked like the perfect family portrait. I wasn't invited into the frame. No one even noticed I was missing. I lowered my eyes toward the bouquet. Blood from my hand had begun staining the white paper wrapped around the flowers. For a long moment, I simply stood there. Surprisingly, I didn't feel anger. Anger burns hot and fast. What settled over me was something colder. Acceptance, crystal clear and impossible to ignore. For years, I had believed that loyalty eventually earned belonging. I finally understood my mistake. You cannot earn a place in someone's heart if they have already decided where you belong. To them, I had never been family. I had been security, a provider, a dependable solution to every financial problem. Now that Ava had graduated, they believed my purpose had ended. The ceremony announcer invited guests inside. Families gathered their belongings and headed toward the entrance. Instead of following them, I turned around. Without saying a word, I walked back across the campus. No one called after me. No one noticed. When I reached my car, I carefully placed the bouquet on the passenger seat. The summer heat had already begun softening the rose petals. I sat behind the steering wheel for several minutes, staring through the windshield. Then my phone vibrated. A text message from Evelyn appeared. Don't forget to take pictures from wherever you're sitting. Ava will want copies later. I read the message once, then I locked the screen without replying. I started the engine and drove away from the university. I wasn't heading home. I was driving to the office of the attorney I had met several days earlier. Every document had already been prepared. Every signature was waiting. As the campus disappeared in my rearview mirror, I realized something unexpected. I wasn't losing my family that day. I had already lost them long ago. Graduation simply revealed the truth. The ceremony celebrated new beginnings for hundreds of students. For me, it marked the quiet ending of 17 years, spent trying to earn a seat in a family that had never truly saved one for me. And before the sun set that evening, I would begin writing an entirely different future. That evening, the house was silent. I sat alone in my study without switching on the lights. Faint rays from the street lamps slipped through the blinds, stretching across the desk where a gray file folder waited. Inside were no family photographs or sentimental keepsakes, only contracts, bank statements, property records, and documents I had spent the past week organizing. The graduation ceremony was over. Now it was time to close another chapter. I picked up my phone and made the first call. "Good evening," the property manager answered. "This is Nathan Cole," I said evenly. "I'd like to confirm that the lease on Ava Bennett's Georgetown apartment will not be renewed. Please process the cancellation at the end of the current term and return the security deposit to the primary account holder." The representative confirmed the details. I thanked them and ended the call. Ava believed the apartment had been a graduation gift. It hadn't. It had always been another expense I quietly carried. The second call went to my bank. After verifying my identity, I spoke calmly. "I'd like to deactivate every secondary credit card connected to my account effective immediately." The agent asked if the cards had been stolen. "No," I replied. "They simply no longer have my authorization." Within minutes, every card issued to Evelyn and Ava became useless. The third call was the shortest. "Bill," I said when my real estate agent answered, "list the Annapolis property tomorrow morning." He hesitated. "I thought your family was settled there." "They were," I answered quietly. "Not anymore." After confirming the paperwork, we ended the conversation. I placed the phone back on the desk and leaned into my chair. Some people would later say I acted too harshly. They would wonder why I hadn't suggested counseling or arranged a heartfelt family discussion. What they would never understand was that I had spent 17 years speaking through actions instead of words. Every mortgage payment was a conversation. Every tuition check was an expression of love. Every sacrifice had been my way of saying, "I'm here." Their response had been silence. You cannot repair a relationship when only one person has been building it. I walked slowly through the living room, the sofa, the dining table, the framed artwork. Every corner of the house carried memories of overtime hours and postponed dreams. I had once believed these walls sheltered a family. Now they simply contained people living comfortably inside my efforts. The sound of keys turning in the front door interrupted my thoughts. Laughter echoed through the hallway. Evelyn and Ava stepped inside, carrying shopping bags and leftover dessert boxes. They were still dressed for celebration. Ava noticed me first. "Dad," she said, frowning, "why did you leave without telling anyone?" "My friends kept asking where you went." There was frustration in her voice, not concern, not worry, only annoyance that my absence had required an explanation. I looked at her for a long moment. Her graduation gown rested neatly over one arm. She had achieved something remarkable. I was genuinely proud of her. But pride and disappointment can exist together. "I heard you were upset," she continued. "You embarrassed all of us." I nodded slowly. "I'm sorry you felt embarrassed." She folded her arms. "That's it?" I glanced toward Evelyn, who watched us impatiently. Then I spoke. "Congratulations on graduating, Ava." A small smile crossed her face, expecting the conversation to soften. "I hope today gave you everything you wanted." "It did," she answered. "I'm glad." I picked up the gray folder from the coffee table. "Because tomorrow life changes." Evelyn frowned. "What does that mean?" "It means," I replied calmly, "that today marked more than one graduation. Neither of them understood. I walked upstairs without another word. Behind me, I heard Evelyn mutter that I was being dramatic again. For the first time in years, those words didn't affect me. That night I slept peacefully, no anxiety. No calculations about upcoming tuition payments. No thoughts about extra overtime. Just silence. The next morning, I sat at the dining table with a cup of black coffee. At exactly 8:15, hurried footsteps echoed down the staircase. Evelyn stormed into the kitchen holding her wallet. Behind her, Ava clutched her phone, panic written across her face. "Nathan," Evelyn demanded. "My credit card was declined." Ava looked close to tears. "My apartment manager says my lease isn't being renewed. There has to be some mistake." I placed my coffee cup onto its saucer. "There isn't." The room became perfectly still. Evelyn stared at me. "What did you do?" I met her eyes without raising my voice. "I stopped paying for a life that no longer includes me." The silence that followed was heavier than any argument. For the first time in 17 years, they were beginning to understand that the man they had always expected to carry every burden had finally set the weight down. And this time, he had no intention of picking it up again. The silence in the dining room lasted only a few seconds before it shattered. "You canceled our cards?" Evelyn demanded, her voice trembling with anger. "Have you completely lost your mind?" Ava looked from her mother to me, her face pale. "My apartment. They're really making me leave?" I folded my hands on the table. "I didn't make anyone leave," I replied calmly. "I simply stopped paying for things that were never appreciated." Evelyn slammed her wallet onto the table. "This is revenge because of one seat at graduation." I shook my head. "No, that seat only showed me the truth." Ava stepped closer, tears filling her eyes. "You promised you'd help me until I found a stable job. I did help you," I answered. "For 17 years. I stood and retrieved the gray folder from the sideboard. Placing it on the table, I opened it slowly. Inside were neatly organized financial records, receipts, bank transfers, tuition payments, medical bills, insurance statements, car expenses, vacation invoices, every major expense from the last 17 years. "I kept everything," I said quietly. Ava stared at the pages in disbelief. "I never wanted recognition. I never asked for repayment. I only hoped my efforts meant something." I turned another page. "Your braces." Another. "Your dance academy." Another. 4 years of university tuition." Another. "The apartment." The stack of papers seemed endless. Evelyn's confidence began to fade. "You were keeping score?" she whispered. "No." I looked directly at her. "I was keeping records. There is a difference. You called Trevor the father Ava deserved," I continued. "Yesterday you gave him the place of honor. Today I'm giving him the responsibility that comes with it." Evelyn's expression hardened. "You can't just walk away from your family." I already watched my family walk away from me. Neither of them spoke. After several moments, Ava finally broke the silence. "I'm sorry." The words were quiet, almost uncertain. I didn't realize. She stopped, unable to finish. I believed she meant them. But some lessons arrive only after consequences. "I'm proud that you graduated," I told her. "Nothing will ever change that." She wiped away her tears. "Then why are you doing this?" "Because love without respect eventually becomes servitude." The words hung in the room. I spent years believing sacrifice alone could hold a family together. I was wrong. Sacrifice only matters when someone values it. I closed the folder. "The house has already been sold. You'll have 2 weeks to make other arrangements. My attorney will handle the remaining paperwork." Evelyn stared at me in disbelief. "You already sold it?" "Yes." "And where will you go?" I picked up my car keys. "Somewhere peaceful." Without another word, I walked out the front door. This time, no one tried to stop me. 6 months later, my mornings looked very different. I had settled into a small coastal town where life moved at a gentler pace. Behind my modest home stood a workshop filled with the scent of cedar and fresh pine. For the first time in years, I had time for woodworking again. That afternoon, I was sanding a small birdhouse when my phone vibrated. It was a message from Ava. "I received my first paycheck today. I know it isn't much, but I've transferred $500 to your account. I want to repay you, even if it takes years. Trevor left a few months ago when he realized Mom had nothing left to offer him. She's working now, and so am I. I finally understand how much you gave us. Thank you for never giving up on me." even when I didn't see it. I read the message twice. Then I looked at the payment notification, $500. It wasn't the amount that mattered. It represented something far more valuable. Understanding. For the first time, Ava had earned money through her own effort. For the first time, she knew what sacrifice truly cost. I smiled and sent a simple reply. I'm proud of you. Build a life you can stand on without leaning on anyone else. That's the greatest repayment I could ever receive. I placed the phone aside and returned to my workbench. Outside, birds circled above the shoreline as the evening breeze drifted through the open windows. People sometimes ask whether I regret those 17 years. I don't. Loving someone is never something to regret. Forgetting your own worth while doing it is. Life eventually taught me 3 lessons. Know your value before asking others to recognize it. Never confuse financial dependence with genuine love. And never be afraid to begin again, no matter your age. I didn't lose everything that day at the graduation ceremony. I found the one thing I had neglected for nearly 2 decades, myself. As the sun slowly disappeared beyond the water, I realized that the best seat in life isn't always in the front row. Sometimes it's the place where you finally stand with dignity, knowing you no longer need anyone's permission to belong.